what are some implications of the Harrod-Domar model? According to the Harrod-Domar model, economic growth and perhaps development takes place as a result of investment, which depends on the net national savings rate. That's the main conclusion. The capital output ratio could also play a role due to technological progress, but that's not as important. In more advanced models, labor growth will become an additional factor in terms of growth, but this is not relevant in the Harrod-Domar model due to the assumption of unlimited amount of labor. That is, Harrod-Domar simply assumes that there are unemployed workers available to work the new capital. In line with Rostow's stages of growth model, Harrod-Domar argues that the most important strategy for economic growth and development is to increase the proportion of national income saved. That is, we can raise growth and development by increasing the net national savings rate. And since development depends on a level of saving and investment, the main obstacle to development is therefore insufficient saving. Nations suffer from savings gaps or financing gaps. If a developing country wants to grow its output or income at 8% and its capital output ratio is 3, it needs only to adopt net national savings rate of 24%. If the country can only muster a net national savings rate of say 10%, then the country suffers from a financing gap of 24 minus 10, 14%. To achieve the desired level of development and growth, the nation should pursue either foreign aid or foreign private investment to close the 14% savings gap. To help developing nations, the international institutions dedicated to promoting development need only extend aid or loans to close the gap. This thinking, which became known as the capital constraint approach or capital fundamentalism, became a justification for massive transfers of capital and technology from the developed to the developing countries in the 1950s and 1960s. It was like a Marshall Plan for the developing world. However, this development approach did not usually work. Why? Well, saving and investment are important, but saving and investment is a necessary condition for development. It is not sufficient. Harrod-Domar and Rostow assumed that all relevant institutions and attitudes were in existence in developing countries, so that all they needed for growth was capital. And this was not true, unfortunately. That is, the approach that worked in Europe after World War II, the Marshall Plan, could not be unthinkingly replicated in developing countries. Now, it's good if an economic model is simple, but a useful model must not only be simple, it must also provide a reasonably accurate explanation for the economic issue. And the Harrod-Domar model failed on this second account. Technically speaking, the main reason that the Harrod-Domar model is not a useful model for long-run economic growth is that it assumes unlimited supplies of labor, which avoids diminishing returns. The relationship between capital and output is unfortunately much more complex than the Harrod-Domar model suggests. Labor is not an unlimited resource. In addition, if there was a massive amount of unemployed labor, then we would expect the price of labor to be very, very low. And therefore, a better way to increase output would be to add more workers, not relatively more expensive machines. The Harrod-Domar model also has an incentive problem. As mentioned, the model calculates a required investment rate, compares this to the existing national savings rate, and then determines what the financing gap is, which should be closed by foreign aid. Clearly, there are some incentive problems here. The greater the financing gap, the greater the amount of foreign aid. The more a country, leaders, and the population consume today, the less they will save today. The less they save today, the greater the financing gap. The greater the financing gap, the greater the amount of foreign aid received. And hence the problem. Rostow had assumed that if a nation reaches its investment target, invest 20% of GDP in the takeout stage, the country will experience sustainable growth, and such growth will lead to higher per capita income. And higher per capita income would automatically translate into higher savings rates, which will lead to more investment and more growth. And that was the cycle that they were trying to jumpstart. But unfortunately, people's incentives might not support this story.